I carefully cut the cord, removed the pressure seal, drew back the bolts, and opened the door.
What Carter just described, that moment of breaching a sealed world, turned out to be only the beginning. Because decades after the last crate was nailed shut, something was still waiting inside. Something that was never supposed to be there. And the moment researchers found it, the official record of Tutankhamun's tomb had to be rewritten entirely. 5,398 objects. That is the number history agreed on. That is the number carved into academic papers, museum catalogs, and textbooks for nearly a century. But here is the problem with that number. It was never actually complete. Carter's excavation was so vast, so overwhelming in its scale, that entire wooden crates of material were sealed, stacked, and quietly forgotten, their contents unexamined, unlogged, and unknown. Every one of those uncatalogued pieces is what archaeologists now call a ghost artifact. It exists, it was recovered, but officially, it isn't there. And one of those ghosts just surfaced. Howard Carter logged 5,398 items from the tomb of Tutankhamun. That number became gospel. It was cited in every major publication, every museum exhibition, every academic paper written about the most famous archaeological find in human history. For nearly 100 years, nobody seriously questioned it. The excavation was meticulous by the standards of its era. Carter was obsessive about documentation, and the sheer volume of material seemed to confirm that nothing could have slipped through. 5,398. A precise number implies a complete count. It implies closure. It was neither. Here is what the official record quietly omits. Carter's excavation ran from November 1922 through the early 1930s. That is nearly a decade of continuous work inside a cramped, airless tomb cut into the bedrock of the Valley of the Kings. The team was constantly under pressure, from the Egyptian Antiquities Service, from the press camped outside, from the Earl of Carnarvon's estate after his death in 1923, and from the sheer physical chaos of managing thousands of fragile, irreplaceable objects in extreme heat with limited resources. Under those conditions, a hierarchy of urgency developed naturally. The intact showpieces, the golden mask, the nested coffins, the gilded shrine, received immediate, exhaustive attention. Fragments did not. Smaller objects, broken pieces, loose fittings, and unidentified materials were packed into wooden crates with the intention of being processed later. Later, in many cases, never came. Those crates were not empty speculation. They are documented. Carter's own field notes reference packed storage boxes containing material that had not yet been cleaned or formally identified. The problem is that hundreds of those boxes have no attached placement records, no grid coordinates from the tomb, no contextual notes describing where inside the burial chambers the objects were actually found. They were recovered, yes. Catalogued, no. They exist in a kind of official limbo, physically present in storage, administratively invisible to the record. For decades, those crates sat in the basement storage facilities of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, sealed, undisturbed. The museum itself holds over 100,000 objects in its collection, and a significant portion of that inventory has never been fully assessed. This is not a scandal unique to Tutankhamun's tomb. It is a systemic reality of early 20th century archaeology, when the pace of discovery consistently outran the infrastructure to process it. But in the case of Tutankhamun, the consequences of that gap carry an enormous weight. Because this is the most scrutinized tomb ever excavated. If something slipped through here, it slipped through in plain sight. In 2013, a team from Tübingen University in Germany began what would become the first truly systematic reopening of Carter's original storage crates. Their project, working in collaboration with Egyptian authorities, was not hunting for treasure. They were attempting something more methodical and, in many ways, more important: a complete reassessment of what Carter had actually recovered versus what he had formally recorded. The researchers expected to find fragments. They expected minor discrepancies. They expected the kind of administrative gaps that any century-old excavation would produce. What they found was something else entirely. Inside one of the wooden crates, sealed since the 1920s, never formally processed, they encountered objects bearing gold fittings. Objects with no catalog number. Objects that, by the logic of the official record, did not exist. The crate itself showed no signs of tampering. The seals were original. Whatever was inside had been placed there during Carter's excavation and had remained untouched ever since. The Tübingen team's findings, when they began to publish, did not simply add a footnote to the Tutankhamun catalog. They cracked it open. 5,398 was no longer the final answer. And one object recovered from those crates sits at a fault line that goes far beyond archaeology. It touches on questions of ownership, of theft, of what it means for an artifact to belong to history versus to belong to a nation. The Tübingen team had found something that the official record had erased. What they could not yet determine was whether that erasure was an accident or something else entirely. One single crate. That is where this gets staggering. Because when researchers finally broke the seal on a specific wooden storage crate from the original 1922 excavation, what they found inside was not a handful of loose fragments or scattered debris. It was more than 100 complete gold applications. Intact. Untouched. Exactly as Howard Carter's team had packed them nearly 90 years before. Think about what that means for a moment. 90 years. 2 world wars. The fall of empires. The entire modern age of archaeology. Built, refined, and rebuilt again. And through all of it, these objects sat in the dark, sealed inside a wooden box, waiting. No conservator had opened that lid. No researcher had catalogued what was inside. The gold had simply been there, patient and silent, in a storeroom at the Cairo Museum, while the world above it changed beyond recognition. The condition of the objects made it even harder to process. Gold does not corrode. Gold does not decay. So what the team lifted out of that crate looked, in many ways, as though it had been packed the previous afternoon. Delicate gilded applications, the kind used to decorate royal funerary equipment, emerged in a state of near-perfect preservation. Some still carried traces of the original linen wrapping Carter's team had used. Others bore the faint impressions of the hands that had placed them there a century ago. But here is the detail that stopped the researchers cold. The mud ceilings. When Carter's team originally packed these crates, they used mud to seal the lids, an improvised but effective method to protect the contents during storage. Over the decades, those mud ceilings had dried and crumbled into fragments. And when the crates were finally reopened in the 21st century, those fragments were present, but completely without context. No record of which ceiling belonged to which crate. No documentation of what the original seal markings indicated. The mud itself, potentially carrying fingerprints, tool marks, administrative stamps from the ancient world, had been stored as loose rubble, stripped of the very information that could have made it priceless. This is the pattern that keeps emerging. Objects preserved by time and circumstance, but the human record that should have protected them, absent. Carter's ledger, as we established, had gaps, but the mud ceiling situation reveals something more troubling than gaps. It reveals a systematic failure of documentation at the moment of discovery, when that documentation was most critical and could never be recovered. Now, in 2025, Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities has launched a project to bring some of these objects into the light for the first time. The planned first public display at the Luxor Museum would represent a genuinely historic moment. Artifacts from Tutankhamun's tomb that no living person has ever seen on public exhibition. Objects that have existed, technically, in the public record for a century, but have never actually been seen by the public. That distinction matters enormously, because if more than 100 complete gold objects could spend 90 years in a sealed crate without anyone noticing, without any alarm being raised, without any audit flagging their absence from display, then the question that follows is not a comfortable one. How much else slipped through the same cracks? Not preserved in a sealed crate, not waiting patiently in a storeroom, but gone, out of the official record entirely. And here is where the story takes a turn, that the gold in that crate was only the beginning of. In 2024, a small cosmetic vessel appeared at a London auction house. Elegant, ancient, unmistakably Egyptian in origin. The auction catalog described it with the kind of careful, measured language that high-end antiquities sales always use. Provenance noted as a private European collection, acquired before 1970. Standard language, almost reassuring in its orderliness, except for one thing. This object appears in 0 excavation photographs from the 1922 dig. It is absent from every official inventory that Howard Carter produced. There is no record of it being examined, catalogued, numbered, or packed. It simply does not exist in the official account of what came out of KV-62. The piece became known informally among researchers tracking the Tutankhamun dispersal as the Gwenol grasshopper case, named after the private collection through which it had passed at some point in its undocumented journey. And the provenance trail, when investigators attempted to follow it backward, went cold well before 1922. There is no paper trail, no photograph of the object in a private home or gallery from the 1920s or 30s. No correspondence mentioning its acquisition. Nothing. The object exists. Its origin does not. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's most prominent archaeologist and the former head of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, was direct when asked about cases like this one. His assessment was unambiguous. They have no evidence of origin or ownership, he said. And in the world of cultural property law, that statement carries enormous weight. Because the burden of proof, in cases involving objects from known royal tombs, should fall on the seller to demonstrate legitimate acquisition, not on Egypt to prove the object was stolen. The absence of documentation is not neutral. It is, in itself, deeply suspicious. What makes the Gwenol grasshopper case so significant is not that it stands alone. It is that it does not. Researchers tracking the dispersal of Tutankhamun's tomb objects have identified similar provenance gaps in objects currently held in collections across multiple countries. Beads, small, easily pocketed, easily transported, have been traced to private collections in New York. Similar pieces have surfaced in St. Louis. Others have appeared in London, in Paris, in collections that describe their Egyptian holdings in the vaguest possible terms. Beads from a royal tomb. Think about that. They are small enough to fit in a closed fist. They are beautiful enough to be desirable. And in the chaos of a decade-long excavation, conducted before the era of digital photography and real-time inventory management, they are exactly the kind of object that could disappear without anyone being certain it had ever existed in the first place. Carter's incomplete records created a shadow, and objects can disappear into shadows. But the grasshopper and the beads are just the pieces that researchers have managed to identify and trace. The pieces they have found. The open question, the one that no auction catalog and no private collection inventory can answer, is how many pieces have not been found yet? How many objects from KV-62 are sitting in storage rooms, in estate collections, in the back rooms of dealers who have no idea what they actually possess? The answer, based on the evidence accumulated so far, is almost certainly more than anyone has been willing to say out loud. And the reason that number stays hidden has everything to do with a problem that is not archaeological at all. It is legal. Here is the mechanism that makes this problem nearly impossible to solve. If an object from Tutankhamun's tomb carries no catalog number, no Howard Carter inventory tag, no official Egyptian record of its existence, then Egypt has no legal standing to demand its return. None. The object cannot be repatriated because, officially, it cannot be proven to have left in the first place. The documentation gap that Carter left behind is not just a historical inconvenience. It is an active legal shield that protects private collections to this day. This is not an accident of history that happened to benefit collectors. It is a structural reality that private collections have learned to exploit with precision. The standard defense in any repatriation dispute involving Egyptian antiquities is provenance before 1970, the year of the UNESCO Convention on the Means of Prohibiting and Preventing the Illicit Import, Export, and Transfer of Ownership of Cultural Property. If a collection can claim, even without strong evidence, that an object entered private hands before 1970, the legal burden becomes extremely difficult for the country of origin to overcome. And for objects from the 1922 excavation, objects that were already unrecorded before 1970, that defense becomes almost impenetrable. The royal collar beads illustrate this with painful clarity. Researchers have traced beads consistent with Tutankhamun-era royal funerary collars to museums and private collections on 3 separate continents. Not in one country, 3. Each institution holds its pieces under different national laws, different repatriation frameworks, different standards of evidence. A legal claim that might succeed in one jurisdiction fails completely in another. The objects are scattered across a jurisdictional map that was never designed to handle a case like this, because no one, in 1922, imagined that a case like this would ever need to be made. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities is not waiting for the law to catch up on its own. The 2025 Digital Reconstruction Project, the effort to build a comprehensive virtual inventory of every object known or suspected to have come from KV62, is explicitly designed to close the documentation gaps that Carter left open. By aggregating excavation photographs, field notes, published reports, and comparative analysis of objects and collections worldwide, researchers hope to create a record detailed enough to support future legal claims. It is archaeology as legal preparation, and it is a race against time, because objects continue to surface at auction, continue to change hands, and each transaction makes the chain of custody longer and harder to challenge. But here is the number that reframes everything else. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's catalog of the original excavation, the most comprehensive attempt ever made to document what Carter found, lists approximately 5,400 objects. Egypt's own internal assessments suggest the actual conduct of objects removed from the tomb may be significantly higher. The gap between those two numbers, between what was officially recorded and what may have actually existed, is where the real story lives. How many boxes are still sealed? How many crates in museum storerooms around the world contain objects that have never been formally connected to KV62? Not because they are unrelated, but because the record that would connect them was never made. The gold in the dark was found because someone finally looked. The question is, how many people are still not looking, and whether, by the time they do, it will already be too late to matter. KV62 was never fully known. It was only partially opened, and what remains sealed, uncatalogued, and unexamined may rewrite everything we thought we understood